Recording in progress. Okay. All right, guys.
Wait,
Welcome
hold
to.
on. Okay, it's
Wait,
recording.
it's recording. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Cut that, cut that.
No, it's okay. Well, we won't cut it. It's part of the fun. Welcome to Popcorn Lore episode 2. We made it to episode 2.
Woo! We
Did it,
made it.
boys.
We made it.
We made
Now that we're rich and famous, we have to continue
On to our real plans of
for our real
world
plans.
domination.
it. Oh, good segue.
All right, so episode 2. What do we have on the agenda?
V for Vendetta.
V for Vendetta.
The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta, held as a votive, not in vain, for the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vicious swaz of verbiage veers most verbose, so let me simply add that it's my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me Bill.
Friends, apparently, favorite movie.
One
Favorite
of them.
movie.
One of them for
One of
sure.
them.
One of his
Definitely-
favorite movies.
Definitely my top 3,
64.
top 5 favorite movies. Top 3, top 3.
You know it's definitely on your favorites when it's in your top 64. So, funny enough, like when we started the podcast, I never thought like that we would talk about this movie. It's one of those movies where it's like it's definitely good and it's like it's memorable, but I didn't think it would like when
Yeah.
you talk about some of these movies, it's not one that comes to your mind right away.
It didn't,
Yeah.
and I don't remember that much of it. I saw it when it came out, but after rewatching it, I realized how much content and references and subjects this movie touches. So
Right.
I'm glad we were doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad too. It's a movie that doesn't get enough love, I'd say. And I'm happy that Aaron chose it because it's like kind of unique in that sense. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, me too.
So
I got lots to talk about.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about all the lore. So quick thing before we start, I'm just going to talk about. So the movie came out in 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it premiered from what I understood, and then
Yeah.
it had an official release in 2006.
Yeah, you got it exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to take 2005. So in 2005, what was happening in cinema around that time? So it was a pretty interesting time. The most notable movies in 2005 were Batman Begins, Sin City,
Okay.
Constantine, Lord of War, Kingdom of Heaven, and Brokeback Mountain.
Oh, wow.
So
We're gonna save that one for another
Yeah.
episode.
for another episode.
That's in my top 64.
So what was cool about 2005 when I was looking at the list is that it was kind of like the birth of the superhero flicks started to come into popularity around that time after kind of Spider-Man and X-Men kind of started like to take the cinema. And because of those movies, I found there was kind of like more of an urge to greenlight certain graphic novel movies, which in turn is why we got V from Vendetta and
Sin City.
Sin City,
Yeah.
So I
Right.
found it was no coincidence, and Constantine, by the way.
Yeah.
So I found it was no coincidence that they kind of were released at the same time. And I mean, we can talk more about that. I don't know how you guys felt around that time for movies.
I mean, Sin City, it really affected me a lot, and I saw it. I had the movie, and I saw it many times after that. So that was definitely my favorite movie of that era. And like V for Vendetta, it was based on a graphic novel, albeit it was a very different movie.
Right. And what about yourself, Aaron?
Yeah, I remember going and watching Sin City in theaters, and like I remember those like it was kind of the era of those like kind of gritty sort of like graphic novel type movies, and then like the comic book movies too. So yeah, I really enjoyed I really enjoyed that time. And I was watching a lot of movies at that time too. So I remember going and seeing like lots of those movies that you mentioned in theaters.
Yeah, it was a exciting time because that was, like I said, like kind of like the baby time for comic books to come on screen. Okay, so that was around the time. Now I wanted to just introduce a little bit on the director. So can you just help me pronounce his name for me, Aaron?
Yeah, so I believe it's James McTeague.
James
That's
McTeague.
Yeah, I tried a whole bunch of different applications to on how you're supposed to say his
Chat
name, and then yeah,
GPT.
exactly. And like the long story short is that that's what I got. I hope I'm saying his name right. That's what
I hope so too. I'm sorry,
yeah,
I
James.
don't think
yeah.
we're in any danger to get sued
No,
in
no, I
this.
don't think
Definitely
so.
not.
And Chat GPT's never led anybody astray, so it'll be good.
Yeah. My first kind of dealing with Mr. McTeague was kind of a favorite movie of mine, Dark City. Actually, he was assistant director for that film,
Oh, interesting.
and a film that I recommend you watch actually a couple of years
Yeah, and I,
ago.
I did watch it actually. It's a great movie.
Yeah, and so watching, V for Vendetta, I kind of like I was like, oh yeah, I can tell definitely that, and I'm sure now when you look back, you can kind of see those touches from Dark City a little
Yeah,
bit.
that makes a
But
lot of sense actually.
yeah, exactly. So he was most notable for, his assistant work on that, and then I think he actually worked more closely with the Wachowskis on later projects like Sense8, and I think even like the Matrix, some of the Matrix movies as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did um so he produced the new one. So he was a producer for the one that came out more recently, the like
Okay.
the most recent one, and then at the same time I believe he was an assistant director on all three of the Matrix movies.
Oh,
So
okay.
in
So there you
in the
go.
same way that he was an assistant director for Dark City. So he got a lot of experience. He worked with the Wachowskis quite a bit.
Okay.
And then it explains a lot in terms of casting choice and stuff, which we'll obviously talk about a little later with the movie.
For sure. So in a way, this was his big debut, kind of like into the Hollywood, like for a big budget kind of film.
It was his first feature film, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
feature
Yeah,
film. Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
major
his
film.
first feature film where he was like directing it.
Right,
Um,
right.
he directed he's not a super like well-known director per se, like in the sense that he was more of like he did a lot of like assistant work per se, but then when V for Vendetta came out, like we mentioned, it was kind of his first major feature film. He since then directed some blockbuster films such as Ninja Assassin, with
Yeah, it's
Rain,
true.
the K-pop
Yeah, with
star,
Rain. Yeah.
The Raven, Survivor, and then like you mentioned before, he did some television series as well.
Sense8,
Working,
right?
yeah, so he did Sense8, and he
Yeah.
also worked on Marco Polo. I remember as well.
Season two, probably,
So
yeah.
yeah, so he worked on those. Those were primarily Netflix shows.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So, besides that, obviously we have to talk about Alan Moore. Alan
yeah,
Moore, who wrote the graphic novel basically that is V for Vendetta. So I'm a big Alan Moore fan personally. Just a Watchmen alone is enough to really like him. But he's kind of like, because I'm a big Lovecraftian fan as well. So Alan
right.
Moore really takes a lot of inspiration from that. And he's done other notable works such as Swamp Thing, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was another movie that came out during that time as well, or not too long afterwards.
From Hell.
From Hell, yes, of course.
Batman
So
Killing Joke.
Killing Joke for sure. So Alan Moore, probably one of the greatest graphic novel writers for sure. From the UK, a little bit of an extremist and centric dude. But
No.
he actually recently had, those master classes. You ever see those
Yeah.
commercials? Yeah, he had a
Yeah.
master class for writing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he was featured on there. I wanted to kind of check that out. But yeah, Big fan of his, and of course, The Watchmen. What an incredible piece. But yeah, what about you guys? You guys into Alan Moore or checked out his stuff before this, or?
I didn't read too many graphic novels in my life. I was more into just regular comic books, and I did read the Sin City comic books, but I didn't read the this one.
Okay.
I know Alan Moore. When he wrote it, it was in the 80s in the UK, and they had the Thatcher government there, which was more like, it was a bit like a fascist government.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the origin of the story was kind of in that in that circle, in the British fascist government there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how it kind of originated. That's what I read, and then yeah, and other than that, I all I know is that when he made this movie, he refused to watch it or to have his name associated with it, because apparently he didn't like From Hell and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the adaptations. So he didn't want to be associated with this movie. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Aaron? What's your take with Alan Moore?
Yeah, so it's funny. I got introduced to him in university. My roommate was doing he was an English major, and I lived in the dormitory in first year with my roommate. And one of his like projects or whatever, he had to read the graphic novel for Watchmen. So then I remember like I wasn't a big like at that time or whatever. I had kind of stopped reading. I did a ton of reading when I was in high school, but I remember I always used to look at like he had that book on display, and I always used to look at it, always used to look at it, and then one day I was like, oh, like what's this? And I started like flipping through it, and then I got like instantly drawn into it, and so that was kind of my like introduction to him, and then over the years, obviously, especially considering like I really loved V for Vendetta. I did some like high level overview of some of his different works. The three primarily being Watchmen, Batman Killing Joke, and then obviously the three V for Vendetta graphic novels.
Awesome. And just to end off here, like, did you guys see this movie in theaters? I personally saw this movie in theaters when it first came out, just because I was a huge fan of The Matrix, and I was kind of disappointed with the Matrix sequels. And when I saw they were doing something different, I figured, like, well, they were associated with it anyways. I'm talking about
They wrote the original screenplay of this.
Yeah, exactly. When I saw that their name was in it and there was Hugo Weaving, I said, this might be sometimes, artists and writers, they kind of need a different pathway, for creativity. So I figured, let me go check out this movie. And I really liked it, out of the theater. I really thought it was a good movie right away. And I felt that the reception was also well received on it. I don't know about you guys. Did you guys see it in theaters when it first came out, or?
Well, I saw it. I think I saw it on DVD first.
Okay.
Maybe a few years after it came out. I think I might have seen it around 2007, and it didn't affect me that much. And it goes to show that I'm a different person than I was back then. Like back then, I find I had a shorter attention span, and I was more attracted to high stimulus movies like Sin City, like Natural Born Killers, like Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. And this movie was more of a classical type movie with more dialogue and more of a concrete story. And it just didn't stimulate me as much. But when I saw it now I feel like I'm more mature and I'm more attentive. I definitely connected with it a lot more than I did back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Aaron?
Yeah, so it's funny. My experience is very similar to yours, TJ. Me and my dad used to take me to watch a lot of movies, like, and in particular, I was lucky because I had a lot of the same tastes as him. So he was into a lot of like, say, fantasy, or my dad had like a kind of this sounds bad, but it's not. But like he had a little bit of like anti-government kind of tendencies. So
This movie's right up his alley.
right up his alley. And then the Matrix movies were like that too. He took me to see like the Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings movies, for example. So like I watched a lot of movies with my dad, and he took me to lots of sequels. So when this movie came out, it was like kind of a no-brainer that me and my dad would go watch it. And yeah, he took me to go see it in theaters, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So did my dad. He loved the like kind of anti-government and like anarchist type
Mm.
sentiments of the movie. So and the like power dynamics and stuff, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Okay, awesome. Well, you know what, Aaron? Like, take us away. Like, let us
Sure.
know what's the rundown. What is this lore?
Yeah. So yeah, the lore.
Trademark.
So
Trademark.
yeah. So first, yeah, the popcorn lore. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about some of the like major themes in the movie. So kind
Yeah.
of segueing from the idea of anarchism, I guess you'd say. Something that's obviously very notable to discuss is Guy Fawkes. So um, I'm not going to go into the super long history of the guy or anything like that, but the short story about Guy Fawkes is essentially he was like a conspirator in the late 1600s in Britain. Um, During that period of time, there was a lot of like anti-Catholic sentiment, and he was a huge Catholic supporter, so much so that he essentially he had tried to like get an army, so to speak, and tried to like cause like issues related to the Protestant government, essentially tried to overthrow like Protestant government, and he was unsuccessful like earlier in his life. And then eventually when he moved to Britain, he was there during a period of time where the Protestant church had like major power and Catholics were becoming increasingly prosecuted. And essentially he was known for something called the gunpowder plot, which was a failed assassination attempt to blow up the English Parliament building in hopes of essentially restoring his Catholic monarchy. What ended up happening was he had rented out a building that was below the Parliament building, and essentially someone kind of tipped the government off that this like assassination attempt was going to take place, and he was found in this particular place with something like 32 barrels of gunpowder, which would have been essentially way more than enough to blow up the Parliament building. And so this attempt is kind of became synonymous with the idea of like overthrowing the government and anarchy and revolution. And his face and his name essentially became kind of a symbol of such, which is something that's talked about multiple times within the V for Vendetta movie. Just briefly, I know that's like a lot, but did you guys did you have any experience at all, like learning about him in school or any of these types of like facts at all? Did you know any of this stuff?
Not at all. And I just want to, so basically, I just want to make sure Guy Fawkes, it's basically the mask that V wears, right? In the movie.
Yeah, correct.
That's okay. Okay. I just want to make sure
So
in case the listeners also they don't know.
yeah. So
So it's
essentially
an
that mask,
avatar.
those and the masks that all the kid, like the kid in the movie and like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
mask that he distributes, those are called Guy Fawkes masks, and it's essentially it's named after him, and he essentially his face essentially became the symbol of anarchy, so to speak.
Right.
The reason that um Alan Moore kind of picked him is him and his like his buddy, the other person that co-wrote the graphic novel, they were making jokes about like, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a guy wearing a Guy Fawkes mask that tried to like overthrow the English government essentially? And at first it was a joke, and then that actually like led them into like starting the graphic novel.
It's funny
Yeah,
how that stuff happens, eh?
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So
Um,
a big theme that I understood from this movie, and maybe I'm wrong, but I saw like it was like anarchism versus fascism.
yes,
Yes.
Okay, okay.
yeah. So I
And
can talk. I can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
just the references in this movie, like when you talk about fascism, the counselor, does they call him, or the chairman?
Counselor, I think.
Chancellor Adam
Chancellor, sorry,
Sutler.
Yeah.
Chancellor, yeah, like
Great actor, by the way. We'll
yeah,
get into the actors.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just to mention that he was sort of modeled after Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, for sure. That
Of
I
Like
got.
course,
the first and last name are similar. Him speaking hysterically on TV, and yeah, just
even the logo for the I forget what the party is called. It's called like the Norse something party. Hold on, let me look it up. They're called the Norse Fire Party. So even the logo, essentially, like there's a lot of scenes when he rises to power where like he's almost like doing some of the Adolf Hitler type
yeah.
type stuff, and people are cheering behind him and stuff. But yeah, the High Chancellor and even the Norse Fire Party, to an extent, are modeled after kind of the
The Nazis, yeah.
yeah, the Nazi Party. So so just to get into some of that type of stuff, so some of the main themes that uh, Alan Moore tried to talk about in this movie were kind of the ideas of moral ambiguity, anarchy. You get lots of like heroes versus villains. There's tons of political power dynamics, and then also like lots of corruption and patriotism. And these are a lot of themes that like kind of reoccur a lot within Alan Moore's works, and they were talked about in this movie. But something that's interesting, like you mentioned before, Tony. So two things. One, the High Chancellor Adam Sutler is actually modeled after. Obviously, there's the ties to the Nazi Party, but also Margaret Thatcher. Essentially, during that period of time when Alan Moore was making the movie, or when he was making the graphic novel, he was kind of worried about Margaret Thatcher's party. So essentially, what had happened is like she ended up being known as kind of like the Iron Lady. I don't know if you guys ever heard that, but she essentially felt a lot or had a lot of similarities to Margaret Thatcher because she was known for like kind of her strict nature. She was also known to have like kind of risen up from a lot of support of the people, and kind of like she was known to get a lot of like almost like unwavering support. So that was something that he was very worried about because he himself, Alan Moore, was an anarchist. So or at least that's what he's dubbed himself. So he was very worried. And so when he wrote the graphic novel, he was kind of talking about what it would be like if in a post-apocalyptic world, if like the worst were to happen essentially, and you'd get kind of like fascism to take over in the UK. So something that's interesting, like you talked about before, is that Alan Moore didn't actually want his name to be associated with the movie at all. He's kind of known to be, I don't know him personally, obviously, but there's like he's known to be somewhat like cynical apparently. And he felt that they kind of like Hollywoodized the movie. He felt it was like kind of too happy and straightforward. So much so, in fact, that he thought that like the characters were like very one-dimensional, like almost like caricatures. For example, like Adam Sutler, he's like a big, in the movie, he's just like a big, like ominous head. You know what I mean? It's like, so they make it out like V is just this good guy, even though he kills lots of people, obviously. In the movie, it's very justified, but in the graphic novels, for example, V is a lot colder, and there's a lot of like moral ambiguity. So in the graphic novels, for example, he makes a point of showing how, say, like some of the workers in the government, how obviously some of them are evil and they are doing lots of bad things, but at the same time he makes a point of talking about how like some of them have families, or he writes things where they make jokes, or even Adam Sutler, for example, in the graphic novel, even though they're very different, him and V actually have a lot of similarities. But obviously, in the movie, for example, they couldn't be further apart. You know, V is this like comic book hero, and then Adam Chancellor's just like this ominous talking head. You know, so
Okay, so they romanticized the movie, and
yeah,
polarized it.
yeah, and that's how he felt anyways, and to an extent, obviously, you know, with Hollywood they have to do that. At the same time, you know, they're gonna have to cut things between like a graphic, 3 full graphic novel,
Yeah,
books. Yeah,
they
they
have to
had.
cut and trim.
Yeah, exactly. So
And get to the point, kind of, because they
like,
have only a certain amount of shooting time, right, to put on screen for the audience.
yeah,
But I wanted
exactly.
to ask you, Aaron, more about the actors in general in this film. So you have Hugo Weaving, who was worked with the Wachowskis previously
Yeah,
on The
correct.
Matrix as their main villain, Agent Smith.
Yeah,
And you had Natalie Portman. You had a lot of British actors in this one.
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
You had
yeah.
Stephen Fry, John Hurt, who I found he did an excellent job again as the Chancellor.
Yeah, he's great.
Stephen Ray,
Yeah, he's the
Aruba
police
Graves,
officer.
yeah, and Tim Pickett Smith. I think those are like the main guys, with Roger Allen as well.
Yeah.
One thing that I was always surprised at by this casting for this film was Natalie Portman, but I thought she did a great job. But it's not a
Is she
role,
British?
not that I know of. I thought she was from the States. Am I wrong? Or
I believe she's
Israeli
Israeli
born?
born American.
Yeah,
Okay.
American. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So like I didn't really envision her as like kind of like in this role, but I found she did a great job for this
Yeah.
in general. And Hugo Weaving, I mean, he did well, for me anyways, he did a fantastic job as V. I didn't even know it was him, like, honestly, when I first saw the movie in theaters, and then I kind of saw the casting later. But what did you guys
Well,
feel about the casting and the actors?
so that's something kind of interesting, actually. So you mentioned like you didn't know it was him. Just before I let Tony answer, something that's kind of interesting is that V cast as Hugo Weaving wasn't actually the original actor. So
Oh, okay.
the original actor was someone named James Purefoy. He essentially did a lot of the shooting for V originally, and so actually because it's more like voiceover and stuff like that, there's a ton of scenes in the movie that aren't actually Hugo Weaving. He just like um voice dubbed over it. So it's obviously it's tough to tell which
That makes a lot
shots.
more sense now that you
Yeah,
say. And I
yeah,
know this
which
actor actually, James Purefoy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what they said essentially is that, so it's interesting because it's tough to know what the truth is. There was rumors that he wasn't like gelling with the role. Um, One of the things essentially supposedly that he said is that he had a really hard time doing the acting for V because he had to wear the mask, and essentially apparently he had a really hard time like talking and acting through the mask.
Right. It must
So
be very uncomfortable for sure.
yeah, so that was one of the reasons supposedly that he had a hard time gelling with the character. Some people said that he just got fired, but obviously it's impossible to know the truth. But
Quick
that's something I wanted to mention.
quick fact, and this is totally random, but did you know who originally played the Predator in Predator movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
No.
No clue.
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Really?
Yeah, he was actually hired for 2 days and he quit after
No. Wow.
because of the
What?
because he couldn't take the suit actually. But anyways, it's another
Oh,
story for another
interesting.
time. But just to show you
Yeah,
that, yeah, for sure, actors struggle, especially when there's makeup requirements or masks. It's tough to do your job.
yeah,
So that's really cool. I didn't even know that. That's really that changes things, and I can see it now. Actually, there's a lot of voiceover, so I can see
Mm.
how Hugo Weaving could why it's not recognizable.
yeah, exactly. Just to get back on the topic, Tony, did you have any like what were your thoughts on some of the actors and obviously like main actress in the movie?
I actually recognized a couple of the actors because I watched some British comedy TV shows from the early 80s and early 90s. So not only did I recognize some of the actors, but I was pleasantly surprised to see them use British jargon, like just
Yeah.
random British words
Yeah,
that I learned by watching all those shows.
Uh-huh.
So when I hear them say like telly instead of television and bloke and bullocks and stuff like that, like it resonated with me. So that was cool to watch them. But what struck me off the most was I was really impressed by the dialogue from Hugo Weaving, especially the sequence in the beginning where he's using just V
Yeah, the
words.
vaudevillian.
Yeah, I mean, even if he was recording that in a studio, that must not be easy to just complete that dialogue. So I was really impressed by that. And overall, I found like the movie was very dialogue based, and it was very more. It was kind of like a theatrical, like go to your mark and do the dialogue, and I appreciate that. It was a little bit more like a theater, and then you have all the action sequences. But yeah, I like the casting very much.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, funny enough, like I found that the it was very much like a speech. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the movie, it had that, and like you said, that's very much theater. Like you have
and
you go and you deliver. You know?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's a British thing, but because when I watch, I've been recently watching Doctor Who episodes, and it's even though it's a sci-fi, like there's a lot of dialogue, and the dialogue is rich and detailed and complex, and I'm not sure you see that much of these type of movies these days.
Very unique in that sense.
Yeah, funny enough, I believe one of the main actors in the movie, I don't remember which one. I think it's Rupert Graves, but I'm not sure. Is also in Doctor Who. Funny enough, he's like one of the main bad guys for one of the seasons. Yeah. Random fun fact. I wanted to talk a little bit about some kind of like interesting aspects of the movie. So, and like a little bit of an Easter egg. So something that's kind of cool is that
Easter eggs. Love Easter eggs. Tell us all the Easter eggs.
Yeah, and then some theories too about just the story in general. So one of the things that I read that's really, really cool, and I found this Easter egg out luckily before I watched the movie, but a lot of the scenes in the movie are designed to create V's in like the letter V in terms of the way the scene is shot. So for example, if two people are talking to each other, they'll be talking in the shape where they'll be on the one side angled a specific way and another way, or there'll be a door, for example, and the way the door is designed is it has a bunch of little V's on it, but there's a ton of, if you really take a look, little symbols where they try and make everything set up in a way where it makes like a V. So if you guys get a chance, if you hopefully watch this movie after you've heard the podcast, take a look and look out for some of that stuff.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
Another thing I read was that they tried to make the movie very gray, like black and white and gray, to reflect like war era, Cold War era, these type of things.
Yeah.
They really tried to make it as gray as possible. That's what I read.
Like militaristic.
Yeah. It's very like, it's like gray or grainy. Something that I forgot to mention before, but one of the major differences between the movie and the book is that in the movie, there's like the sickness, essentially. That's like the major kind of evil that takes place. But in the comic books, actually, it's kind of a post-nuclear apocalyptic war. So I think part of the reason that they did that was because at least the theme of the comic book is supposed to be kind of the same. Essentially, it was this like war where America and Russia were essentially dropping nukes on each other, or like, and then you're in this like kind of post-apocalyptic scenario, and then Britain kind of just finds itself like in the in-between, and so that's part of the reason why like Adam Sutler, for example, rises up as the High Chancellor, and it probably explains a little bit more about why some of the characters are the way they are in the movie, obviously. Yeah, the circumstances. It probably makes a little bit more sense, and that's definitely the reason why they shot it that way, because the theme is probably supposed to be the same as like it's still kind of supposed to have a post-apocalyptic type of theme, right?
Interesting.
Can I just add this in before we run out of time?
Yeah.
How did you guys feel at the beginning of the movie when they said it's curfew, you can't be out?
COVID.
and then
Yeah.
and that having that 5 years ago would have still been sci-fi, and then us seeing that, it's actually something that we lived through.
Yeah,
How did
Yeah.
that make you guys feel?
Well, again, like I said, it's one of those movies that like you go back and like like you said, it's sci-fi, but I always find that sci-fi is you're not too far. It's kind of like a dial, when you dial something to 9, you're always just that one click away from 10, and reality is very close to 9 on the sci-fi dial, you know what I mean? So
Alan
I
Moore
found
actually
that
had a
was
quote
like,
that was almost exactly like that.
oh, really?
Yeah, funny enough, I don't
Funny.
remember exactly what it was, but basically he
Okay.
said if you're writing stuff like something about the future, you're really writing about now. So it's
Okay,
really
yeah.
funny that you mentioned that because that's actually one of the main themes when he designed the comic book. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, to answer your question though, that really touched home because of the circumstances that we
Yeah,
just went
yeah.
through.
Because when Natalie Portman was outside and she knew she was past curfew, it reminded me of that time where I went to put gas and it was past curfew, and I had that scary feeling that I'm gonna get caught or I'm doing something illegal, and I was just out at like 10:30 p.m. Right,
Right. Yeah.
so
yeah.
I was like, I lived a little bit of that. I'm an
Even
anarchist.
yeah, even even the idea, like I know it's the movie, but the movie essentially there's the sickness too. So even that theme was very,
That's
very
true.
similar to COVID.
That's very true. Yeah.
Also there was lots of protests and stuff like that, and obviously we lived through lots of like protests during that period of time too. There was a lot of like
Definitely.
different movements and stuff like that. So it's funny because even though the movie was made and the graphic novel was made I think in the 80s, it really reflected the times well, and it hit a little bit differently watching it now versus back when I first saw the movie.
I think why these graphic novels, and especially from Alan Moore and these writers, they really hit home is because I think things happen in every, generation or that history repeats itself,
Yeah.
in a sense that when you talk about these things, they're grounded in truths, But yeah, I mean that's our takeaway for V for Vendetta. I mean, thank you, Aaron, for giving us such great information about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, my
thanks, Aaron.
pleasure. Yeah,
It's
thanks guys. It
it
was
was a
fun.
very great pick. I didn't expect that at all. Like I said, it was a joyful surprise, kind of.
Well, when you pick a movie and three great minds, magic happens.
Like ours.
Uh, anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, I
No,
really appreciate the movie. I'm glad you chose it, and I can't wait till the next one.
Awesome. So thanks, guys, for tuning in for episode 2 of Popcorn Lore. Episode 3, we're going to be discussing Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke. So I'm excited to show and talk about that film with you guys. And Aaron, thanks again for showing and telling us a bunch of lore about V for Vendetta. And if you guys haven't checked it out, check it out. I think it's aged very well. And yeah, that's about it. We're going to wrap things up over here.
All right,
thank
bye,
you very
guys.
much. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.